right, Chris Madden from Matchnode. Good to have you on the Brand Outlaw podcast. Your company helps established brands shift their marketing strategies to a more digital focus. So I want to start by asking, what are some of the challenges unique to larger, more established brands when it comes to their digital marketing efforts?
Great question, Matt. Some of the challenges that can be more unique to more established brands include things like bureaucracy, the way that they've always done things, and not necessarily in a organizational negative sense all the time. Sometimes we work with banks and insurance companies where there's a lot of compliance issues. Maybe a newer entrant even to those industries will do things differently. And so it just sometimes takes longer to get people on board. And then sometimes some of the marketing teams we work with within these more established organizations might be digital in nature, but say their creative department is very busy doing a different sort of work for their billboard campaigns, which might be really important for them. For some businesses, those things still really work. So sometimes the organizations aren't digitally focused. Sometimes the teams that we're working with, the actual group, marketing teams we're working with, aren't digitally focused. And sometimes even the way the product is being delivered is newly digital in a way that it didn't used to be. So any of those things can happen. Any of those things can add challenges and opportunities.
Yeah. What are some of the biggest mistakes you see businesses making with their digital marketing?
Some of the biggest mistakes include the old defaulting to the highest paid person's opinion, the HIPPO problem, yep, because they don't have their data set up correctly necessarily. And sometimes some of these things are mapped over from non-digital marketing teams where they didn't have ways to measure things. So the way that they make the decision is still this world of, I'm not sure which 50% of my marketing spend is working. And so, and that again can be organizational, a human thing, but there's also sometimes systems that just aren't going to connect. So one of the biggest mistakes I see is sometimes these organizations will make buying decisions on vendors or third-party platforms like the back end of their website, and they might base it on the relationship they have with somebody they met at a conference or something like that, and not really on, well, do these systems play nicely with the systems that we have in place that we need to grow digitally? And so things like back-end integrations will become a secondary or tertiary or non-concern. And then when we are told, okay, here's the new system, like set it all up, we say, this doesn't set up correctly. It doesn't play nicely with the things we need to play nicely with. So that's a pretty common mistake where the systems don't connect well, and even newer systems aren't considered correctly. And then also there's the decision-making processes from the old way of doing marketing to a digital approach can be different.
Yeah, I like the first part of your answer where you said defaulting to the opinion of the highest paid person. But if you have the data,
exactly,
you can show them that, because otherwise, what are you going to do? It's your opinion against, the top dogs.
And even that has to be done carefully. You might be able to win a battle and lose a war. You have to be sure that that over time, the people in the organization are going to be able to take positive action with the information you're giving them. The point isn't to prove that you're right or to prove that they're wrong. Of course, it's not going to allow you to keep the clients for a very long time if it goes that way. It's more about helping them and understanding what their context is right now, both personally and within the organization, and how the information you're giving them is useful or not useful. Sometimes if we think it's the right information and this is what you should actually be using and thinking about, but that's not what they need. And there's been many times where I have a deep feeling where that's the case. And then I learn something more about their situation and I say, oh, I didn't even know that. That makes sense. So it's just over time having enough experience to know that you have to meet them where they are. And especially with things like data versus opinion and how decisions are made, you have to we try to take the point of view of helping the organization and the people with a slight challenge for sure. Sometimes it is challenging, and that involves saying, sometimes there are times where we say, we hear you, we'll do this. Here's what we think. And let's move forward in the way that you want us to move forward. Even better is, we hear you, here's what we think, let's run a test. And of course, that often is the best way to go about it. But having the data makes a big difference, but that doesn't mean the job is over. It just means you need to use it correctly based on who you're dealing with and what organization you're dealing with.
Chris, you've worked with several pro sports teams, and since we're in the midst of the NHL playoffs, thought we could talk about some of the hockey teams you've worked with a bit.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now I'm a Boston Bruins fan, so I'm in mourning right now.
It's a tough time.
Oh, what a collapse! You know what? When they got that record for the best regular season, I said, "This is awesome," but now I'm getting serious 2007-2008 Patriots vibes.
Undefeated Patriots.
This is a little scary.
It's a lot of pressure. And I've said here, I offer you a sympathy and empathy if we're talking about putting ourselves in other people's shoes. But, I'm a Chicago sports fan. It sounds like you're 0 for 2 in that regard of having a record-breaking regular season and not finishing the deal. Or do you remember the Bulls winning go 69 games and setting the record, saying that there were T-shirts that they gave out at the beginning of the playoffs that Jordan gave out, said, "Don't mean a thing without the ring." And then, of course, now the Warriors 72-10. Yeah. And they lost. Memory's failing. Did they lose that season? I think they did, right?
Was that the season they lost to Cleveland?
I think they went 72-10, lost, and then signed Durant.
Oh, okay. But anyway, I'm guessing you're a Blackhawks fan.
Yes, yeah, and the Blackhawks are a client of ours, which is super cool.
You've worked with them in the Arizona Coyotes, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, I was reading a case study on your site about the Coyotes, and that was really interesting because they were looking for a way to keep fans interested during a transition year, which can be really tough. A lot of fans might be ready to write it off. And they came to you, and the season had already been underway. This was not an off-season thing, correct? So you had a short amount of time to make an impact for them. How did you make that happen?
I would say that there's a lot of reasons why people go to professional sporting events, and each team and each market has a slightly different take on that based on what the other entertainment options are on any given night and how that arena event is different or unique. And, lines up value-wise with what the other options in the market are. So it's really different than being just a fan of the team and watching the game, because those people are how it's hard to pull out. When you are trying to sell tickets for a team that is at the last 25% of its season and has among the worst records in their sport. So those people aren't the ones we're going for. What we go for is people who want a special night out, and people who there's a lot of theme nights. So whether it's a Marvel night or a movie or a cross promotion, United Center does a lot of these things, whether it's Latino night across the board. So all of those things we want to use to give people a reason to come out. And then there's just basic promos that whatever the team wants to do is willing to do to make it seem like a valuable experience. So the combination of those things plus a marketing channel that's underutilized and not normally executed at the level it needs to be in order for the results to be what these teams need them to be. And there's a lot of setup and creative work, technical setup work and creative work that has to be done to the 95th percentile plus level, or else you're just not going to get the return. So our ability to do that plus and marrying that with the marketing initiatives and value propositions that they already have. They're just not combining those two things. So combining those two things we found works really well for almost every team. And it's easier when the team is in first place and those teams have less inventory problems. They might already be sold out on a season. And so they have less need for someone like us to come in and drive sales. But in the case of the Coyotes, we went down there and enjoyed a game, and it's very hot outside, and you go inside and it's very cold. So even going to a movie theater in places like Arizona, even something as simple as that is just a different vibe than what your other options are. So there's a lot to it, but it's really combining the marketing initiatives with an underutilized channel.
Yeah, you were talking about appealing to different groups, and we were talking off air about buyer personas. How do you use buyer personas in your work generally, but also specifically something with the Coyotes or any professional sports team where you have a very large consumer base?
We were talking off air about this because you have a recent episode about buyer personas, and it's for Matchnode. The way we've used buyer personas has changed quite a bit with the way that the ad platforms that we're super specialized in has changed. So if you would have given me a buyer persona for a professional sports team in 2017, we would have used that information to largely go look for segments of the audience that match that buyer persona. So let's say for the Coyotes, there was a theme night for Marvel. And I think the movie Thor had just come out. And so it was Thor night at the arena. In 2017, if that was the case, we would have looked for fans of the movie Thor, fans of Marvel, fans of the Coyotes, and that would have been it. We would have hit the button and it would have worked because it really was prescriptive. The way you would set up an audience, and we might maybe from previous seasons, if there were other Marvel movies, we might have had a list of people who bought tickets to those nights, and we would target those people directly, and we target a 1% lookalike audience of those people. We'd be very focused on the targeting with that information and how we map that persona into specific targets in the ad platforms. Fast forward to today. We are going to just target one broad audience generally. Now there's exceptions to that, but really the difference is this broad targeting is the thing that's really going to work. These ad campaigns are much more scalable across the board. Not as interesting necessarily for sports teams in a particular geographic market, but nationally we set things up now to scale much more easily. And so, yes, we would, of course, have a separate campaign for Thor, Marvel, the Coyotes, but generally what we're looking for is that broad audience to start to work, and we do that through creative. Now, in 2017, creative was also important, but in 2023, creative is the way that we will map a buyer persona into a campaign. And so I'm using the Thor example because it's pretty simple and easy to get your head around. Thor meets the Coyotes. It's pretty easy to imagine what those visuals are. But sometimes we get into a more nuanced situation where we're selling something about a benefit of convenience, like for a bank account or something, where you want to know that it's quick to open and that there's low fees. And so those things are more about more subtle benefits because the product isn't quite as differentiated as Thor night at an Arizona Coyotes hockey game. That's a pretty obvious overlap. But when things get more nuanced, we have to use creative to subtly pull those things out. And that's why those really specific buyer personas are even more important, because you really have to hone in on what those emotional hooks are, or what are the feelings that we want the people to associate with the brand that we're working on. So hopefully the persona and how we use it differently. Targeting in 2017, right now, it's really about how we use it in creative because the targeting ideally is broad.
Let's say you're working with a sports team. You mentioned, okay, well, if the team's doing really well, it's almost like the seats and the merch and everything kind of sells itself. It's a lot easier for the team to get behind. But are there different measurements of success from the team's perspective, measuring what you're doing when the team's at the bottom of the league and the fans are, they can have a fun time, but at the same time, they're not too excited about what's going on the court or the ice? How do you adjust for things like that?
Generally, they give us a target at the beginning of our engagement that we will have talked through together as to what's reasonable to expect and what we think success looks like versus what we see happening with other teams and what they need to see success look like. Almost always for the teams we work with, that's measured in terms of ROAS, return on ad spend. So for every dollar that we put into an advertisement for them, how many dollars in ticket sales do we drive? And so a lot of the work over time in the metrics is drilling in on those numbers, what exactly did we do that was additive? How do we, there's a lot of slicing and dicing to figure that number out. Now, each team is different. When we started with the Blackhawks, they had a sellout streak going, and it was very public. This is not a secret. They wanted to keep that sellout streak going. And so we were at the tail end of that sellout streak. And so there were times where we saw an undersold game that was 2 or 3 weeks out, and we would push that game to make sure it sold out because their organizational strategy was to keep the sellout streak going. And so there's times where the strategy, the higher organizational strategy is filtering down to us. And then maybe there's micro strategic decisions we might make in the mix. But for those larger brands, sometimes our strategic value is really understanding their strategy and the objectives of the people on their team we're working with so that they can map into the campaigns, and that as the success bounces back, we know that it's what they need and want personally and as an organization. So there's one example of a strategy that was very specific to their time and place. There's other teams. So like you said, when we started with the Coyotes, we started in the middle of the season, and we did talk about a return on ad spend target, just a number. And there's other teams that we've worked with, other pro sports teams, that they gave us that number at the beginning of the season because we started at the beginning of the season. We've worked with the Chicago Bulls for many years. We've worked with the Chicago Cubs ownership. And so each team is a little bit different, and I don't want to say too much about any particular team, but there are teams that will set a return target at the beginning of the year and a budget, and they don't, and they have said to us, it doesn't matter to us what the month to month to month looks. We're giving you this much money to spend for the season, and we want to sell this much in revenue. And so in one particular case like that, we saw that the team wasn't going to be good. So we pushed the ad spend towards the beginning of the season because we knew that on Google search towards the end of the season, the secondary market would be cannibalizing any undersold tickets for late season games because, if the team isn't playing attractive opponent, if two bad teams are playing late in the season, it's going to be tough to sell any marginal tickets. So we might lean the ad spend towards the beginning of the season. That's only if the team tells us that was the structure that they went for in their objective. So again, they had a strategy that matched that, and that had to do, I think, with trying this channel out and wanting to see success before they scaled and trusted it more. And now with that client, we might turn things up or down more based on what's going on in their schedule and how the results are. So it really, really depends. And that's common across all our clients. It's not just sports teams, but I'd say one thing we're good at is, again, meeting the client where they are strategy-wise. These, multi-billion-dollar valued businesses tend to have their P's, not always, but they tend to have their details lined up, particularly on a marketing and on ticket sales is such an important piece of their businesses and kind of the annual refresh of any branding or anything that they might be doing differently. All that's very natural to them. So a lot of our job is to absorb that. We don't work with tons of startups, but every once in a while we'll work with a smaller, earlier stage business, and we might just help more drive what is the strategy, who are we talking to, and why and how. And then in the middle, there's a lot of bigger businesses that are open to our feedback, and we'll take maybe some strategic hypotheses they have and test them out in the market and come back to them with, we thought it was price, we thought it might be price or it might be convenience, and we've run all these creative tests to understand which of those concepts works better. So based on this test strategically, we think your audience cares a little bit more about price, for example. So it really depends on where the client is. But the strategy, I would say strategy should be discussed all the time, but shouldn't change all that much. It should only change very purposefully. And after a lot of clear discussion, you should probably have 10 strategic chats. I'm totally making this up. But you should have 10 strategic chats for every time you change your strategy. So I don't know, maybe it's 100, but it's way more than one. It's not like, let's just change strategy. So maybe some of the tactics in the campaigns might change, but for sports teams that are not in the midst of a transition, they tend to keep to annual plans pretty clearly, and our job is strategically connect into that.
Very good advice about knowing the difference between strategy and tactics. And, one's a long game, and, that's what you need to stick with. I saw a recent post on Matchnode's Facebook page. It was a Henry Ford quote: "Stopping advertising to save money is like stopping your watch to save time." I love that. It's something we've discussed on the show before. Why do you think advertising is often one of the first things on the chopping blocks when businesses are looking to cut expenses?
Because you can.
Yeah.
It's very painful. No one generally wants to fire people. No one wants to. Then there's a lot of fixed costs that depending on the type of business. So you can't cut any fixed costs, and you don't want to fire people because your team is good. Let's hope in an optimistic and positive situation, everyone on your team is valued and doing a good job and in the right seat. And yet you need to cut something. Like what you have to for some reason. Now there's got to be something going on in the market or your business. If you need to make a cut, maybe you hired too many people and you have to let someone go because you made a mistake as the decision maker. But assuming all those things, I think it's just a button you can push that feels less painful than the other buttons. But that's like on a small business level, kind of just a gut response to your question. I think though that it's a short-term mindset is the point. Is I'm having pain right now and I need to cut something. And the thing that scares me is that I keep seeing these bills come in every day from Facebook ads and I want to stop that, turn that off. I see that on my credit card and my numbers are upside down and I need to stop this right now. Now, I would say maybe in the case of any of these ads or particularly digital ads, I, as the business owner, would turn off not ads that aren't working. But I guess we're putting in here that your advertising is working and you still have to turn it off. That means that there's something else in your business that is extremely broken. So if your ads are working and you're turning them off to save money, that means that you need to shine a light somewhere else because your unit economics somewhere, you have too much cost somewhere, or you're not charging enough. Like something in those formulas aren't making sense, because if your ads are working, which, like, for example, we could say a 3 or a 4 return on ad spend, meaning you put in $1, you get $3 out or $4 out, depending on the business type. There are a lot of businesses for which that works. It's still a high cost of advertising, but let's say that's a marginal sale that you wouldn't get otherwise. There's a lot of businesses for which that works. There's businesses for which that does not work. But in that realm, if you need to cut ads, again, I'd say that you need to examine other things in your cost structure, whether you need to charge more or you're spending too much money. The other thing I think that it points to is short-term versus long-term, which I mentioned a bit, but there are lots of buying decisions, and they're like, especially as it relates to brands, as your business is so deeply expert in, you want it to be a very long-term relationship. So cutting advertising now means that your relationship with that consumer or person or client in 6 months is going to have like less messaging than it would if you continue to advertise. You can keep relationships fresh over a longer period of time, with this long-term view versus I'm worried about finances right now, so I need to cut ads. And in 6 months, you're really going to be in a problem because now your top line is suffering.
Yeah. And from my perspective, and this is more of a proactive step that really, you can't just quickly go to when you're in a position where you have to cut some advertising or something. But up front, do the work to make sure your brand messaging is very strong and that you're already communicating the value of whatever you're selling, so that when times are getting tough and there's some cuts that need to be made, you're not going to shift to like desperation in your advertising, like dropping all your prices on stuff, lowering the value of everything that you offer because people are still going to want to come to you. And of course, if that's strong, if the advertising is strong, then you're probably not in this position anyway. But that's why I say make sure brand messaging is really dialed in from the beginning so that you already have that in consumers' minds.
I would agree. I mean, I'd add one final thing on this point, and this is more as it relates to our business and small businesses. We're a 12-person agency. We're guilty of this, and it's up top of mind because we're starting work on improving it. But just another reason why it gets cut is because it's not budgeted. It's not all written down very formally. If this is our plan for the year, here's what we're going to make in revenue, and here's all the money we're going to spend on all the different things for the whole year. I'm always 90 days out. We're watching cash super closely. We do a lot of strategic planning. We're not like running things willy-nilly, but I don't have that hardcore annual budget with forecasts and reforecasts and continually updating that. We're going to do more of that. But I think the more you have that dialed in and written down, the less you deviate and cut advertising because you've had a bad month. You say, I have this plan and I know what the plan is. if I've had a bad month, maybe I need to reforecast, and then on the year I'm going to spend slightly less everywhere or something, and therefore you adjust. But it's less like whipsaw reactionary to whatever the most recent news is, and it's more like sticking to an annual budget and forecast. Again, giving myself a little advice here is something we need to get better at.
Yeah, I hear you. That is great advice, though. Let's shift gears for a little bit to your NFT project, Seabums. Can you tell us what that's all about?
I will. Thank you. Seabums is a generative PFP profile picture project. Its mission is to support ocean health. So in the heady late 2021, early 2022 NFT market, we launched and donated 20% of the sales we got from our initial mint to ocean charities. So we worked with a few different ocean charities, donated almost $150,000 so far. And it was a wild ride. It was a lot of fun. It was extremely intense for a few months. It was way more than we thought we were signing up for in a lot of ways. And I learned a ton of things. And then it totally slowed down as the NFT market totally slowed down. I love NFTs. I love crypto. I love Seabums. I think, though, that is a very nascent technology. And there's a lot in the years ahead to be written and done about how tokens and NFTs in particular figure into our economics. I think they'll be deeply embedded. And so currently, Seabums is a small ocean loving trash picking up crew all around the world. It's cool. We're in early May 2023, and we got through the winter months. What the audience has been doing, or what the community of Seabums has been doing, really focused on for the past 9 to 12 months, is organizing and collaborating around beach cleanups. So there are things called POAPs, proof of attendance protocols. They're like NFT badges. We design a monthly POAP for anybody that goes out and cleans up a beach near them, takes pictures, puts it on our Twitter or Discord. And so you get this POAP and just an acknowledgement that you cleaned a beach in that month. And then we give away an NFT each month to one of those POAP holders. So this month of May 2023, we've really kicked it up a notch, where we had a community. We have a community wallet that, as the NFTs were flying off the shelf, we were putting a percentage of the money, this percentage of the ETH, into this community wallet. We had some ETH left in there a year later, and decided, the community agreed and voted on doing a daily beach cleanup grant. So right now in the month of May, every day we're giving away 0.04 ETH to whoever does the best cleanup. And there's terms about what a best cleanup is and how that's determined. For instance, today the cleanup's worth 0.08 ETH because nobody did a qualifying one yesterday. We're on May 8th. And so today's worth 0.08. So we've had a couple that were 0.08, a couple of 0.04 days. So it's really fun. I really enjoy, like I said, crypto and NFTs. I think they're deeply important, particularly with the sort of work we're in. Kind of the decentralizing forces and the centralizing forces that play in our economy are very interesting and important to me. So that's Seabums. It's been tons of fun, and hopefully the world's beaches are slightly cleaner because of it.
That sounds awesome. How did ocean health become such a passion of yours?
Two answers. One, I lived in Costa Rica. I did a sea turtle conservation program when I was in my early 20s for a few months. Mm-hmm. And then I went back and lived in Costa Rica for 3 years in my late 20s. So I lived in Costa Rica along the beaches for some years of my life, and did some conservation work in those days. I think that's really when it grabs me. The other answer is that when my co-creator of Seabums, my partner, and I started the project, we actually went to a Bulls preseason game in 2021, in September of 2021. And it was the first game, so I can remember what night it was. And we talked about the project, and we said, doing something charitable was very important to us. And we understood the NFT market to be global. So we were thinking, what are causes or problems that we think are important and global? And both of us pretty quickly came around to the oceans, and that connected to the concept of the entire project, which are these cartoon fish.
Yeah, they are really, really cool designs.
Thank you.
Who's doing the design for you?
My partner, Nate Azark, is doing the designs. I said thank you. As soon as I said thank you, I was immediately like, I should not take credit. This is all Nate's work. Nate is a friend and my partner in the business, and he's a designer. He's a designer and an artist. The business is called 12 Line Studio. He's done a lot of work with the Milwaukee Bucks and their new stadium. He connected us to Lending Tree, which is one of our great clients, and we connected him to the Cubs, and he did some murals on construction fencing outside of Wrigley Field around the construction. But Nate's background and his start was in concert posters. So he's done concert posters from everybody from Metallica to the Grateful Dead to the Killers and Elton John and on and on. And so having his work in an NFT project was super, super cool. We've been friends for years and talking about crypto for years. He was trying to figure out how he could tokenize his posters somehow, or these posters are a unique, scarce thing that are really only available at the concerts that they're about. So that was a couple of years before we did Seabums, because he knew I was into Ethereum and Bitcoin years ago. And so when the idea dawned on me that we should do an NFT project for charity, the thing that really clicked for me was Nate. That was the moment I was like, oh, Nate, of course. If Nate does this, then it all makes sense. And so that was in September of 2021. And by March of 2022, we were like, oh, it was so wild. I mean, it was really fun. And again, learned a ton, but it definitely overtook life for 3 to 6 months.
Yeah, I can imagine. One of the things I like about this project is that it's digital, but it kind of bridges that divide between online and IRL with the beach cleanups. How widespread is this?
The Philippines and South America, Australia, certainly. Somebody I just gave a HOAP to, or someone who won the, if you look at our Twitter account, you'll see it, but someone who got the grants on Saturday. It was for 2 days because it had overlapped, and it was grandfather and grandson. And the grandson, I don't know his real name. His name was Trancer in the Discord. That's what I know him as. He's been doing beach cleanups forever, and they have Seabums t-shirts because, in different eras, we would print out t-shirts and send them to people who did beach cleanups. So there's and they're in Essex, England, on an island. And I feel like I slightly know him. I've talked to him on Twitter Spaces and things, but he maybe is 15 and his grandpa's there, and they're talking about coming in from the cleanup and the mom making comments. So there's things like that are really cool. And so as far as how big is this? It's global. It's literally anywhere. I don't know that we have anybody that I've seen in China or Russia. I think somebody in Singapore, in Taiwan did one, but where it is a very small, tight community, and we wanted to get bigger, which is why this grants thing was a fun idea, and it's only a weekend, and it really has picked up the activity and the excitement around it again. So we'll see where it stands at the end of the month. Another thing that I learned is just to time box these efforts and make them bite sized. So I could definitely handle a 1 month sprint to put all these grants out and manage the program with help from a lot of people in the community. But we'll take a deep breath when that's over and see what to do next. But it's been a lot of fun. And you're right, the real life digital thing is what I find to be interesting too. There's and that was a theme for Matchnode going back to early days with these established brands shifting to digital. We saw and understood that these digital companies, these digitally native brands, D2C brands, mattress companies, all these brands had people who had our expertise that were often in the co-founding team. If you were not digitally native and you didn't understand digital ads and how to run a funnel through landing pages and the metrics and how you iterate and run all that creative, you don't have that pre-embedded in your D2C brand, then you are unusual and you probably are at a disadvantage. And there's a lot of great D2C agencies, not a lot. There's a few that I know really well. Great D2C agencies that are very dialed in on that e-commerce funnel and scaling it in those metrics. That is not us as much as we are driving people into restaurants, to having people go to an event, to buy a ticket, to go to a baseball game, to go to a yoga class, to do something in real life. We have a coaching client. We have lots of, like I said, finance clients, people who are opening bank accounts or getting loans for their businesses. So there's almost always a real thing happening in the back end here. Not to say that like D2C product-based companies aren't, but they're not digitally native. Even LendingTree started as a phone business. They added this whole digital thing, years later. It's been 20 or 25 years, but it didn't start as a brand just about driving digital leads. So that IRL piece of Seabums, where I think crypto is an incredible tool for collaboration. We have people collaborating around the world with trust because we have this thing in between us that we created that is Seabums. And without that thing, we would not be connected. We could make a group on Facebook or Twitter about it, so there's this, and there is like a financial piece to it. Like without the financial piece or without the feeling of ownership and the buying and selling and the transacting, it's not as sticky. Like the collaboration is sticky because there is a group ownership. And Seabums is a tiny, tiny experiment in this broader Cambrian explosion of experiments that is happening in crypto with both fungible tokens like Ethereum and Bitcoin and many others, and non-fungible tokens like Seabums and lots of others. But I'm proud of the tiny, tiny, tiny little impact we're trying to make. And I think that I hope there's the grant structure of what we're doing right now is definitely a test, and it's partially, again, using some of the small community funds we have available to try to continue in the mission of doing the good that we're trying to do. But I also think grants and crypto together, small grants, micro grants, is a really powerful idea. There's a great organization called Gitcoin that does a lot of things like this, public goods and people collaborating together to do things that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do. And yeah, when you ask how big is it, I think of the size, but you're asking about globally. And in Web3 and in crypto, it's funny how those things become secondary in a way that I don't see anywhere else, because even in other cases without crypto in between, those things can be secondary. But this idea of how are we going to transact? I'm never going to buy or sell anything from you because, how are we going to get money to one another? So I could go on and on, but I do find that IRL piece of Seabums it was definitely part of what we're trying to experiment with and learn about.
And I will point out you're using Ethereum for this, which is one of the more ecologically sound cryptocurrencies. So hopefully more of the crypto industry will move toward what Ethereum has done.
Well, I'm happy that proof of stake is in place and it all has been launched and is working well. And I'm happy that it decreases the amount of electricity that Ethereum uses. Mm-hmm. I do find it challenging. There are some cryptos that waste energy, I'd say. Mm-hmm. I would say Bitcoin and Ethereum were never those cryptos. And I think that Bitcoin, because you get into a very slippery slope discussion of like, what can you use energy for and what can't you use energy for? And so I find that to be a troubling discussion. Mm-hmm. I may not think this new toaster should be able to use electricity because I find it wasteful, but someone else may not find it wasteful. And then, the way that Bitcoin and crypto can be an answer to a lot of these problems by balancing load in places like Texas, I think is extremely innovative. There is natural gas being flared and just burned and wasted, around the world because there's nowhere to connect it to and nothing to do with it. And now you connect that to a Bitcoin mine and all of a sudden that's being turned into a resource. So I find the environmental criticisms of crypto to be, misinformed at best and sometimes manipulative at worst. I'm not saying that that's what you're doing. I'm just saying generally politicians and media with those points of view fall into one of those two camps, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, it sounds like there's a lot more nuance to the conversation. As you just brought up, I mean, you did bring up a couple of points I just hadn't heard brought up before in that short answer. So that's great.
Yeah, check out the Bitcoin flaring thing. There's a truly incredible company whose name is escaping me. They're in Texas. Like I said, if you're familiar with flaring natural gas, you're just burning the natural gas that you can't use. And so there's some pretty incredible, and load balancing in Texas is also happening, where they're using excess energy to mine Bitcoin, but as soon as other uses of the electricity, like residential, need it, they can turn that down in a way that very few other uses of energy are able to do. I found the move to proof of stake for Ethereum. I found the electricity debates going away to be a nice benefit of a much more deeply important technological update. But the amount of nuance required to just dip your toe into crypto is hard, and it's a challenge. And I definitely understand that it's a problem. It's something that the industry needs to get better. I'm proud and hopeful that something like Seabums can base something as complex as crypto and something simpler for people to get their minds around, because I really do think it can be a very large force for good in the world. And I'm troubled by the newspaper headlines that lack nuance, that have everybody thinking that this is not a force for good, or that it wastes energy, or is just for scams and things like that. So hopefully in the long term, people will come around.
Yeah, I'm sure they will. I mean, especially with examples like yours, obviously doing something great with it. One more question about Seabums. Can people in landlocked states like mine participate by cleaning up lakes or rivers?
Yes, sir. Thank you for asking that question. I live in Chicago. So I'm certainly not on an ocean. So absolutely. Before Seabums, I experimented with a small side project that was very similar. It didn't have any crypto element to it, but we were just paying people to go out and clean up a place near them. Spend 2 hours, we'll give you $50 before and after pictures. This was way before Seabums. And so and there's been people within the Seabums community sometimes that said, no, it has to be a beach. And I've always said, I believe anybody that is willing to go outside and clean up something near them for, we say it has to be an hour or two sort of a thing, willing to put in that effort, it should be rewarded. That's what we're trying to drive. So yes. And we say things like, if it's a park, or if it's a river, or if it's a stream that's feeding into a lake or whatever, like the waterway idea is something we've kind of stuck with. But even if you just cleaned up a park, we think it's great and would definitely give you a pro app for it and enter you into the competition. But yeah, so go to any waterway, definitely is 100% included and qualifies.
All right. Awesome. Do you use any NFTs in Matchnode campaigns, or would you use NFTs in them?
Good question. We'd love to. We have a client that has Polygon NFTs that are essentially receipts, and they have designs. It's like a design forward t-shirt business. And so they have designs. The Bulls, Chicago Bulls, first NFT I ever owned was Chicago Bulls NFT. So watching clients do this was part of what gave me the confidence to do it ourselves, to do it myself. And so we would love for some of our restaurant group clients to dip into it. And I'm aware of some of the reward programs. Like reward programs are a really good use for NFTs and for crypto, where you can just get the restaurant's NFT. Maybe the restaurant partners with a local artist or something if they're that kind of place. And then there's an NFT that changes and updates based on how many times you're in the restaurant. You get different things based on your 10th visit or your second visit or whatever. So much more there. Starbucks has a great one. They're not being called NFTs. This is the thing you'll see, and we are seeing, and I think this is going to be a trend. I don't think people are going to say NFTs in 5 or 10 years. I think they'll just say, I've got this thing. I own this digital thing. I own this thing. And so, Starbucks just rolled out a pretty large program, and they're calling digital collectibles and passports and things like that. So yeah, we'd love to use NFTs with clients. We have been willing to accept Bitcoin and Ethereum. We started, no one has actually paid us in Bitcoin, but we offered to take it as payment starting, I think, 2015. So a long time.
Wow. You're way ahead of the game. Anything coming up on the horizon for Matchnode or Seabums that you want to talk about?
I would love it if anybody wants to learn more about us, just to head to matchnode.com. And from there, of course, you'll be able to find our social channels, because we do organic social as well as paid ads for clients. And so our organic social channels, whether it's LinkedIn or or Instagram, whichever you prefer, are good places to follow us. So that's the best way to stay up to date.
So I appreciate you coming on today, Chris.
This has been great. I really appreciate it.